Welcome back. I'm Neil Scott on Clear Channel Radio, visiting with Cynthia Leeds Friedlander. She's the author of the book Breastless Intimacy, a celebration of love, loss, and learning. It's a cancer survivor's memoir about being whole and desirable with significant scars and missing body parts. Cynthia joins us tonight in the studio. With the revelation that Angelina Jolie had a bilateral mastectomy, came a new awareness of the options available to women facing breast cancer. That story is relatively new. Cynthia's story is over 20 years in the making. Cynthia, why tell your story now?
Certainly, Angelina Jolie was great inspiration for me to make this story public and to bring this memoir that I wrote over 15 years ago into a more public forum and actually have it published. It was very cathartic when I wrote it 15 years ago. Angelina Jolie's revelation coincided very closely with the failure of one of my saline breast implants that had been there for 20 years. So it was a perfect storm, so to speak, in terms of things that had happened. Because as I went through having a breast implant that had been in my body for 20 years collapse inside my body and saw the deformity of that, which I had not experienced in my first breast removal experience, because both breasts were removed and reconstructed simultaneously. So it was actually rather traumatic to have this innocuous event 20 years later in which I had to have surgery and visit a breast surgeon and go through all of that. And it brought it all back to me very clearly. And of course, then the timing of Angelina Jolie simultaneously with that was very inspirational. And I realized that this was the time to tell this story, and this was the time to get this story out. There's also another piece. When I first wrote it, because I love writing so much, I did want to get it published. I used a pen name. Instead of Cynthia Friedlander, I used Samantha Hollander. And I changed all the names in it. The names are still changed because I want to protect people's privacy. And I thought if I ever published it, it would be under some other name, because I had a business life with the name Cynthia Friedlander, and it just felt like I shouldn't do those simultaneously. And then Angelina Jolie made her announcement. It became absolutely clear and even imperative to me that I would have this book published under my real name, my professional name.
Author Cynthia Leeds Friedlander joining us. She's the author of Breastless Intimacy, a celebration of love, loss, and learning. She's also the author of Speakeasy, the communication guide for career and life success. She is an accomplished author. She's joining us to talk about this book. Cynthia, let me ask you, how did breast cancer change your life? And how did this surgery change your identity?
All of this is in relation to what happened to my sister. I certainly had a very strong body image prior to having been diagnosed with breast cancer. My diagnosis came 3 months after my sister died. And my sister died a very horrible death. She was sick for 2.5 years. She had metastatic breast disease. Her first diagnosis, first discovery of breast cancer was horrific. It was stage 3. She had a tumor in her neck that you could see growing every day before she went on chemotherapy. She had a breast removed, and she had reconstructive surgery. And I had seen what one reconstructed breast looked like next to a natural breast. And I had watched what she went through. And I was 46 years old. I knew that I didn't want one reconstructed breast and one not reconstructed breast next to each other. I knew how unnatural that looked. I also knew at 46 that it was likely within 20 years I'd have breast cancer again. So for me, the decisions were so easy to make. I knew that I wouldn't have to go through chemotherapy. I knew that I wouldn't have to have radiation. And I knew that reconstructed breast actually looked pretty good, and that as I got older, I would look better than a lot of older women because my breasts would not be sagging and old. So these were all decisions that came to me very naturally that I would never have been able to make if my sister had not been through what she went through. And I felt so fortunate. As a matter of fact, even though I was diagnosed with a very early stage of cancer growth, it was microscopic. There was nothing metastatic possible in what I had, and I was preserving my life. I was going to sleep very well every night. after having this surgery. So for me, it was easy to do. It was hard to go through. The decisions were just so clear to me.
What was the reaction of the doctor that you originally went to? And what was the reaction of your family, your friends?
The original cancer surgeon, the original surgeon that I went to, had discussed many options with me. He knew about my sister. And he had said to me, if we find cancer in the margins, the way the surgery is done for the original biopsy is very bizarre. They cannot see anything. It's microscopic. Through a process that is like mammography, they insert a wire in your breast and mark the tissue that is to be removed. And he had told me when they remove this tissue, if there were this type of cancer, which is called in situ, carcinoma in situ, if they found that in the margins, he would recommend mastectomy. And he said to me, if you want to consider bilateral mastectomy, I would be in support of that. He was not imposing about any decisions. He gave me lots of information, and he told me that that would be a decision he could support. And as you see with Angelina Jolie's decision, and it is really surprising to me, our wonderful internet gives us a lot of access to information. I was very unaware of how many people are making this decision. Many women are, because it's a stage of cancer, and some women are doing it because they have this gene that has been identified. They call it the BRCA gene, and if they have been identified with that, they're removing their breasts because they know what the statistics are. And so the decisions were easy in terms of the medical support I got. It was wonderful. There was a wide range of support. I think many people were shocked. I was a young woman. I was a single woman. And to choose mastectomy and to choose bilateral mastectomy was alarming to people. And there were a wide range of reactions. The negative reactions came from people who were insecure themselves or who felt that their own identity was so dependent on their breasts that they couldn't, it was hard for them to see me making this decision and feeling confident about it. So there were a wide range of reactions people had.
The book chronicles a series of men in your life as a single woman. How did the men respond to you, and how did you respond to the men?
That's really, it's really very interesting, and of course it's quite a long passage of time now that I can look back on. And the book looks at each of the experiences I had. The first experience I had with someone new was a friend of mine who took me out to dinner one night, and we came home, and he said, we're talking about it, and I was talking about being concerned about my desirability and what I would look like and how men might respond. He said, well, let me see them, let me see them. So I showed them to him, and he told me I was still a babe or whatever it was. He was just a good friend, and it helped. And I had those kinds of support systems around me. The first time that I really fell in love with a man and so much wanted to be with him intimately after this surgery was terrifying to me. I write about it in the book. I talk about walking on the beach with him, and I knew he wanted to kiss me, and I was afraid that he would feel this hardness in my chest, this unnatural, these objects, and know that I'd had this surgery. And I write about the night that I finally told him. And each relationship, each subsequent relationship became easier. One of the vignettes in the book is called Via Email, and I realized that I'd gotten to a point with someone. I'd been out to eat with him several times. We've been to the movies, we've been running, I've been hanging out with him, and looks like it might get a little more intimate, this relationship. And I sent him an email. I figured, okay, if he doesn't like this concept, he won't come to dinner, and that'll be how that unfolds. I think I was extremely fortunate. To my knowledge, there were no men that turned away from me because of this. None. There was one man that he's in the book, I think it's called The Widower on the Beach is the name of that vignette. His wife had died of cancer, and I was very concerned of the reaction he might have. And there were some other events that took place that caused him to turn away, or potentially why he turned away. I don't know why he turned away for sure. But he was the only one. the only man that I cared about who I did not move forward with. And I don't know if it was because of my breastlessness or not.
The book is Breastless Intimacy, a celebration of love, loss, and learning. It's a cancer survivor's memoir. Cynthia Leeds Friedlander is the author. You can find out more about it at her website, www.breastlessintimacy.com. Early in the book, you describe your breasts as your bowls. What's that about?
The first implants that I had for 20 years were saline implants. They were very round. They were very hard. They were very unnatural looking. I became very accustomed to them, and they felt like what I looked like. I forgot how I used to look. This became natural to me. And because they were so round and looked like bowls, I started calling them my bowls, and I write about them in the very beginning of the book. There was one point along the way when someone said to me, "They're not your bowls, they're your breasts. Don't talk about yourself that way." And I realized that it had been a little self-deprecating. And I stopped being self-deprecating. I still called them my bowls. It felt like a term of endearment. It's what they look like. The new implants that I have from the collapse of that saline implant that I then caused the new surgery are much more naturally shaped. They even jiggle a little bit. The other ones didn't. So I feel a little bit more like I have breasts that are more natural looking. And I don't call them my bowls anymore. They're not round and hard. They look different from my bowls.
In the first year after the surgery, did you miss your natural breasts?
It's very interesting. There's something about me that's really very solid. And so the sadness about not having my breasts, I felt fine. I really felt like I was who I was. There were two things about not having my breasts that were very sad to me. One of them is really strange because it had to do with nursing. I had nursed my son. My son was 18 years old when I had this surgery, and I was a little old to be thinking of having more children, and never did, and knew that it was very unlikely that I would again. And yet that had meant so much to me, that feeling, that's what was important to me about my breasts. And I knew that I couldn't do that anymore, even though I was at an age where I wouldn't. And that felt very, very sad to me. The strange thing was, though, I lost all sexual feeling, and I knew that. I had been told that. My breasts were removed, and I had no sexual arousal in my breast. And that was the second. I said there were two things. That was the second thing that was very difficult to go through. And it hadn't been that important to me as part of my life, my breasts, as part of my sexual activity. On the other hand, it's such an innocent, lovely initial place to start. And I didn't have that anymore. The strange thing was, though, even though that I had no sexual arousal whatsoever, I could still feel exactly like what it feels like when the milk lets down in the breast when you're nursing. So I had that sensation without any real nipples. So it's very, very strange. With the new surgery that I've had, and I now have the silicone breast. It's a silicone gel, and it's safe, and I have those now. Since that surgery, I cannot feel that same sensation that I used to feel for nursing. I slightly feel it. It's not really there anymore.
Cynthia Leeds Friedlander joining us. The book is Breastless Intimacy, a celebration of love, loss, and learning, a cancer survivor's memoir. You can find it at Amazon.com. You talk about the second surgery. Fast forward now, 20 years to that surgery. What happened to precipitate a need for the surgery?
I was actually on the phone one night, and I was trying on clothes and talking on the phone, and all of a sudden I walked across the mirror in my bedroom, and I looked down and I said, well, I won't say what I said because I don't want to use that language. I was rather shocked, and I said, something is wrong. Something is wrong. And what happened is the saline inside my left breast was leaking. It was leaking internally. In other words, my skin looked normal. The shape of my breast was collapsing. And it happened on a Friday night, and I could not see a surgeon could not call a surgeon. I didn't feel like I had any emergency situation. I did call on Monday, and it was very, very fortunate that my surgeon could see me the next day, which was a Tuesday. And he made an appointment with me for the surgery to replace both implants. And during those, it was about 10 days. I was really very fortunate that I could have that surgery right away. During that time, every day, the saline leaked inside my body, and it was very deformed looking and horrible. And again, as I was saying before, I had not been through anything like that. Even though I had had bilateral mastectomy, I had had 4 surgeries in 1 year, 4 general anesthesias. I had biopsy surgery on both breasts because they wanted to see if they were going to find any abnormal tissue in the healthy breast. They didn't. I still had it removed. And I had reconstructive surgery, and then you have to have an implant exchange. The initial implants are not the ones that you get to keep. And so I'd had those 4 surgeries. At no point in time was I dramatically deformed or did one side look horribly different from the other. So this was very difficult. And in my head, I didn't think I would ever have to have those implants removed. I had been told when they were first put in that potentially at some point in time I'd have to have them replaced. I didn't think that would happen, and surely not after 20 years. 20 years, they were just fine.
How were the emotions different the second time?
It's very interesting. There were some very excited feelings the second time, and that I was going to get these new implants, because the other ones were not very natural looking and weren't very pretty, and I would never have chosen to get new ones just to look better. I would never choose any kind of surgery in an elective basis. This was necessary. So I got to get the new implants. So I had some very positive feelings about that. And I'm also a very positive person, so that was helpful. It stirred up a lot of the old feelings. I was very surprised at how many things about my sister's surgery and things about all that she went through, and that year of surgery, it all came back to me. I've always had very good support around me, and that is what I wish for people that go through this. There's nothing that makes these experiences better than having really solid support around you, which I did have all through any of this 20 years ago and recently. That made that experience doable, and even I have a way of getting great satisfaction out of difficulty. You know, you can either go through it and it's horrible, or you can go through it and know how lucky you are and get through it. It's hard to remember what it was like 20 years ago.
Cynthia Leeds Friedlander is joining us. The book is called Breastless Intimacy, a celebration of love, loss, and learning, a cancer survivor's memoir. A couple of things stood out to me in this book. One was back in 1998 when you were involved with the Race for the Cure in Central Park. Talk about that experience for you.
Yes, that was a very strong experience. I was in the survivor's tent, and I looked around and saw all of these young women in their, some of them could have been in their 20s for sure, definitely a lot of women in their 30s, very young women. And I'm thinking, how is this possible? How can this be happening to these very young women? And I was a single woman. I had dated. I had started new relationships. I had had that experience. It all came at a point in time when I had been a married woman. I had given birth to a child. I had already been through divorce. I had already gone through the difficulties of starting relationships as an adult. And I thought, how do these women cope, and how do they come into their sexual fullness when they've had these kinds of assaults on their bodies? And there's another chapter in the book that you're referring to, that particular time in 1998 when I was doing that Race for the Cure, and I was seeing those women there. Earlier than that, and earlier in the book, there's a chapter called Sluts and Good Girls Support Group. And there were young women who attended that support group that night. And I was so moved by what they were going through. And again, you asked me why bring this book out in the public, and it's to give that wide range of women views of what can happen and how you can move forward and with such difficulty. Young women having their breasts removed, it's very sad, and yet it's very brave, and yet it's very important, and for people to be making these choices and be strong and gain courage. And I'm sure that every one of these women that have been through this will come out stronger and better, and their lives will be fuller for it. Those that survive. Some of them won't survive.
The book is available at Amazon.com. It's called Breastless Intimacy, a celebration of love, loss, and learning, a cancer survivor's memoir. You talk about the women. You also, in the book, talk about the men. In fact, one of the chapters is a list of men to stay away from. How does that relate?
It relates because the book is also called A Celebration of Love, Loss, and Learning. And so, indeed, there was a lot of loss. And as I went through that loss, I do write in that chapter that it's rather humorous list. The list isn't so humorous. My approach to it is in good humor. And I learned from every experience. Every chapter, I call them vignettes, actually, these, because they do stand alone, and they're little slices of different things, slices of relationships, slices of experiences. And in that last section there, the vignettes are warnings, if you will. They're writing about the seriousness of taking care of your body and being aware. For example, this isn't the answer to your question. I want to say it, though. 85% of all breast cancer is non-familial. I thought my sister and I both nursed babies. My sister nursed 2 babies. There was no breast cancer in our family. This isn't going to happen to us. And I feel many people think that if they haven't had a family history, that they don't have to worry about it. And 85% is non-family related. So your question was about my list of men to stay away from. I learned about some patterns and themes that I saw in men that would be good to stay away from those men. On the other hand, I also say in that chapter that I remained open-minded and open in spite of the list of men to stay away from. I take each encounter I have in life on its own.
The book is called Breastless Intimacy, a celebration of love, loss, and learning. It's available at Amazon.com. You had the surgery in 1993. 20 years later, you had the second surgery. You really came full circle, not just physically with the implants, but emotionally as well. The last chapter in your book is about full circle.
Yes, that's the epilogue. And there were 3 full circles, actually. One certainly was the surgery and the revisitation of mastectomy or reconstructive surgery. It was all a full circle, and to have these new implants and have drains in my breast, and it was very similar to the experience that I had 20 years before. The other full circle had to do with a relationship that was in my life and how I had started a new relationship and realized that there were some very missing ingredients in the new relationship and some very powerful ingredients in a relationship that I had ended, and have a very beautiful story in this epilogue of how I came full circle back to the love of my life, the main relationship that I had been in for quite a number of years before that. So that was the second full circle. The third full circle is the most important because it's evolution, a full circle of psychological and emotional well-being. And there was always this feeling I had of, needing to fix something or needing to get something right or something missing or just not feeling complete. And there's a wonderful quote. It's from Rainer Maria Rilke. Be patient toward all that is unsolved in your heart and try to love the questions themselves. Do not seek the answers which cannot be given you, because you will not be able to live them. And the point is to live everything. Live the questions now. Perhaps you will then gradually, without noticing it, live along some distant day into the answers. I had always felt like I was living the questions. And this full circle, I became aware of a very different feeling. I grew into living the answers. And that's what that third full circle is about.
Cynthia Leeds Friedlander joining us. She's the author of Breastless Intimacy, a celebration of love, loss, and learning. You had your breasts removed 20 years ago. You had a second set of breasts implanted 20 years later. Any regrets?
None.
What advice would you have for women who suddenly are faced with the devastating diagnosis of breast cancer?
I have to talk about not just the diagnosis of breast cancer, because very often with the diagnosis of breast cancer, the last thing that is a good thing to do is breast removal. It's more about family history, a certain kind of family history where you have a lot of breast cancer in the family. I know I said that 85% is non-family oriented. However, there are women who come from families where there is such a history. Angelina Jolie is one, her mother died of. And it's the breast and ovarian cancer that are connected and who have this gene. So people now can find out if they have this gene or not. So the word that we've left out of our conversation is about prophylactic. So it is a very prophylactic choice to make to protect you from advanced breast cancer. So the treatment for advanced breast cancer is different than what you can do to avoid ever having this diagnosis. And I certainly don't think that women across the country or across the globe should be having their breasts removed just to avoid breast cancer. I do think it's a difficult decision. I think it's different for every woman. I think it requires a lot of inner strength and facing realities and getting all the good information you possibly can and speaking to professionals. I think a lot goes into that decision. I think it's a huge decision. For me, it was an easy decision because of what my sister had been through and had been through so recently. 3 months after my sister died, I was diagnosed with DCIS, ductal carcinoma in situ. This type of breast cancer is in the breast ducts, and it can be microscopically scattered throughout the breasts. So it is a type of breast cancer that is very hard to be sure it's all removed because it's microscopic and because there's so many ducts in the breast. These are the kinds of decisions that women have to face. For me, it was the right decision. It may not be for every woman. And I would have a hard time advising any woman on the decision that I think she should make or that I would recommend. I can only share what it was like for me in the hopes that it helps women make the decisions that are right for them.
It is a very powerful book. It is a very personal book. Breastless Intimacy, a celebration of love, loss, and learning. The author is Cynthia Leeds Friedlander. What did you learn?
I learned in each experience. We talked about, I learned the men to stay away from. I learned that well-being always comes from within. When you go through difficult experiences, you do think, why me? And when you see other people who appear to you as if they have everything in life, they're happily married or they're happily coupled and they've got beautiful home or they've got beautiful children or they've got this perfect life you see. And you look outside yourself and you think of the things they have that you think, why don't I have those? Or why did this happen to me? And these are natural tendencies people have. And then you realize all the things that you can learn from this experience and all the joy you can gain and how much stronger you can be and how self-sufficient you can be. These are wonderful things. These are wonderful things to learn about yourself and to listen. The easy stuff doesn't teach you much. The easy stuff doesn't make you stronger. It's the hard stuff that makes you a beautiful person, that makes you a strong person. Loss is the best teacher on the planet.
It is a fascinating book. It is a revealing book. It is called Breastless Intimacy, a celebration of love, loss, and learning, a cancer survivor's memoir about being whole and desirable with significant scars and missing body parts. Cynthia Leeds Friedlander, thank you so much for joining us.
It's been a real pleasure.
I'm Neil Scott on Clear Channel Radio. We'll be right back.